Hey, there we are. There we are. Okay. Let's see if hey, and look who's with us, folks. It's Eric.
It is me. And actually like on time.
It is I, he says.
It is I.
Well, I'm glad you're set up because I'm not fully set up yet on this end. So I need
I caught you like off. Yeah, I mean it's even early for you.
I know. Well, the thing is, I was in the process of getting my notes ready and everything. And I looked up and realized, oh, crud, it's like 10 to 12. I got to get going. So I
got to get going.
I put everything over here and was just getting everything copied over. And then I realized, you know what, I should probably reboot my internet router because I found that that's helped with this in the past.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay. Yeah.
Now, the other thing, the folks listening don't know this, but we talked about it the other day because we had a really successful Ecamm connection. We always have those problems with dropping and
yes.
issues and things like that. And I said, you know what? I'm using the latest Ecamm beta, the 4.0.6. The official release was 4.0.5. So I was using the beta because the beta had something in the changelog that said it addressed performance issues on Intel Macs, which is what I'm using right here. Hang on one sec. There we go. And I thought, okay, well, I'll use the beta on Friday. And wouldn't you know, 4.0.6 official got released last night. So
oh, really?
I'm now running it. I made a copy of the changelog. I don't know why it's always so difficult to look up a changelog for software. Perhaps that's something we can address in our conversation on coding today.
Yeah.
But the point in the changelog is includes various optimizations to address performance issues on Intel Macs. Maybe that was the problem we were having. I don't know.
Maybe that was. Yeah. And I know I didn't, I think, like I said to you the other day, I thought for some reason, and you know what? I knew better because you did say you were using your MacBook Pro, but I thought you were using your Studio. So, but yeah, I mean, and we had really good success with that. In fact, I was in another app. In fact, I'm doing that right now. Actually, I've been able to switch around without having anything. And by this point, we would have already had to reconnect. I mean,
It would have gone to pot,
yes,
as they say.
yeah.
Well,
so
let's
this
see
is
here.
kind of a neat thing.
Yeah. I am getting a couple. So here's inside baseball for everyone watching this. This is all the pre-show stuff, by the way. And speaking of pre-show stuff, I always try to mention this very early up front, and we're about 5 minutes in, so it's not quite as early as I like to mention it, but I put chapter markers in the shows. So this is our warts and all recording process, what you're watching right now. The actual show, the audio version of the show gets released in the regular for Mac Eyes Only podcast feed. And I have a question
warts.
for you about what's that?
Without the warts, right?
Some warts.
Yeah, some warts, but not as.
Yeah, a little compound W applied to some of them, and then
Yeah. W, is that still around?
I assume so. I guess. Yeah, sell it from my wagon on the side of the road. Hey. Anyway, so I put chapter markers in here so that if you're watching the video version of this, that includes everything, all this getting set up and all that kind of stuff. And we're going to do a little setup in just a minute here. But if you're watching this down here in the corner of YouTube, you're going to see a little indication of the chapter markers. And if you click that, you'll get a whole list of all the chapter markers right on the right-hand side of your YouTube window. I honestly don't know what it does on mobile. I know you can look up chapter markers on YouTube on Roku, and I presume on Apple TV as well, but I don't know how it works on mobile.
You know what? I guess I don't either. I don't know. You know what? I think it's pretty much the same. I know it is the same on the iPad, and I think it is. It's the same as it is on the Mac. It just gives you the little lines, and you can scrub with your finger to the different chapters. I don't know if it's like Apple TV or whatever, where you can push up and actually see the separate, or you can even do that on the Mac too. But yeah. Yeah, so it is possible.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. I just don't know how to do it off the top of my head. Let's see. Oh, fun news. I'm using my brand new low profile mic arm here. So, if you remember in the past, you would see my mic arm over, where was it? Over here. You would see it kind of sticking down here and getting into the picture.
Yeah.
And it came, I actually had to have it come over my monitor, my secondary monitor over here. It came over the monitor and then down below, and I tried to make it as inconspicuous as possible, but I looked when I added the chapter markers to the video with Jeff, the last episode. I'm looking at this stupid arm, and my face kept going behind the arm, and I'm like, oh, I got to do something about that. So I looked up low profile arms, and I found this beautiful. There's a few of them out there, and some of them are really inexpensive. And I thought about getting one of those, but they don't have the articulation that this one has. This is from Elgato, same folks who make these Keylight Airs that I'm using here, which I really like. These are pretty slick, and Elgato makes neat stuff. They make the Stream Deck that I'm using here that allows me to kind of switch between us and all that. Stream Deck is great for that. I can use it to turn on and off my lights. Woo! There we go.
Yeah.
But they also make this low profile mic arm. And there is just a tiny bit of it sticking up like right here.
I see that. Yeah.
Tiny little bit. That's actually the, what do they call it? The little rubber bandy support thing for the microphone.
Right.
And I could get that.
That's what it's called.
The rubber bandy support thing. Yeah.
Rubber bandies.
So there are two things I liked about this Elgato one. It is low profile, and they all their advertising showed it going under monitor. So I'm like, it's not going to go under my. It doesn't go under my monitor. It doesn't go anywhere near under it. But it does clamp onto the desk nicely, and then it has channels in it for the XLR cable to come out of the mic and then go down the channel. And what I like about that is the channel has a magnetic lid on it. So you run the cable down the channel, and the lid for the channel just magnetically sticks on,
Snaps
which is
right
awesome.
on. That's
but
cool.
More importantly, the little joints on it have 360 degrees of rotation, and then this part of the arm that's closest to me will go up. I think it even said it'll go up like 90 degrees and something like 60 degrees down. So it's got a lot of articulation to it, and it comes with the adapters I need to use my mic versus the, whatever they call it, Elgato Wave or whatever their microphone is.
Yeah.
Which I'm not using. I'm using this Audio-Technica mic. But it looked like, compared to some of the others that were out there that were a little bit cheaper, but didn't have as much range of motion as this one. And I needed that, and it turns out I really did, because if I had purchased one of the less expensive arms, low-profile arms, I wouldn't be able to position it the way I am right now. So I'm actually pretty happy with that. So that's a new piece of equipment being used right now, live as I actually used it last night on Dave's show for the first time, but live on for Mac Eyes Only. Mike's using his new low-profile mic arm.
And that's the first hour right there.
That's the first hour right there, yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, so neat piece of equipment if you're looking for a low-profile arm. The only thing that I think would be cooler is if it offered other options to mount to the desk besides the clamp, the desk clamp.
Right.
It's a nice desk clamp, but I was watching, can't remember the name of the show, but Conan O'Brien's podcast. I was watching an episode or segment of that on YouTube the other day, and he has some low-profile arms on the desk that he and his guests sit at, but it seems to be mounted to the desk, and then the arm, like they have multiple arms coming out of one mount. And that looked really, I don't have any need for that, but to have the ability to mount this directly to the desk would be nice versus the clamp. That's my only comment there. Let's see here.
Yeah, that's cool.
I wasn't even planning to talk about that, so there you go. Let me get to some other notes here, and then we're going to have to do a little setup before we start the show. Okay, I mentioned the chapter markers. I did have a question for you, Eric. I don't know if you're aware of this, and anyone watching can chime in with comments too. Send me an email or let me know your thoughts. But you can now label a playlist on YouTube as a podcast and have it be found in the podcast section of YouTube. Now this is cool. This is a podcast. This is we're going through the recording process to create an episode of For Mac Eyes Only. We just happen to be streaming it live. But what do you think? Should I be tagging this playlist as a podcast? Or does this not count as a podcast because this is the, as we said, warts and all behind the scenes stuff, even though the main show is part of it as well? What do you have any thoughts on that?
No. Yeah, I think you could take it as a podcast. I don't see that why it's different. I mean, even if it is unedited or whatever, I mean, that's what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't have any concern about that. I mean, Yeah, no, I think that's, I would definitely do that.
This is certainly the unpolished, unedited version of For Mac Eyes Only. Not that the actual audio show is all that polished, but it is the
Oh, no, it's
unedited,
super polished.
super polished.
Yeah.
Actually,
Yeah.
I suppose it would be interesting for someone to listen to the audio, kind of sync it up time wise to when we start recording on the video
Yeah.
and sync it up with the audio, and you'll see how much shorter the audio episode is from the time we start recording to the time we stop recording.
Yeah.
And that's because it's edited. I do edit the
Yeah.
podcast and take things out, and I don't move things around typically. I can think of maybe two, maybe three times in the 16 years of For Mac Eyes Only where I move things around. Only because we would be talking about something, go off on a tangent, kind of like I'm doing right now, and then we get back on topic again. But I wanted to keep that tangent in, but it didn't make sense having it where it was, so I would like pick that up and
Move it.
move it elsewhere. And that's rare if ever that I do, and especially now. That was more common when the show was more rigidly structured than it is now.
Yeah. Right.
The interesting thing is this episode is a little bit more rigidly structured. We got together the other day to talk about it because I was worried about what I just talked about, not staying on topic, going down little rat holes and not focusing on, because you were going to be talking about getting started with coding, and I kind of feel like there really has to be a certain flow followed to have this discussion. And so you very generously used some of your time the other day to join me, and we kind of worked through this. I mean, we spent an hour and a half on the phone. I don't know if I told you,
Yeah.
a quick call, and an hour and a half later, we had something down that I think is going to work, and we have a plan for future episodes on this too, which is cool.
Yeah. And I think, too, part of it was, we wanted to see how Ecamm would work with everything, just because, like you said, a certain amount of people will be listening to this, but then other people could watch it, and, how we wanted to be able to present things and do whatever. So,
Yeah, and I think this is the first time since we started doing this last August that we're going to be directing people to the YouTube video to see some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about. We'll articulate it as best we can, but we're also going to be demoing it as well. And as we go further into this topic in future episodes, it'll be more important to watch those demos. And maybe we'll create little short snippets of them instead, or YouTube shorts of them, instead of saying, oh, go watch the whole video. Or, although you could go watch the whole video and then just jump straight to that chapter marker if you wanted to.
right. Which is nice too. You could just, and that's the other great thing about YouTube and chapters. You can skip what you want and go right to the meat of whatever.
Exactly.
I always love it when commenters put in the chapters.
I'm sorry.
when commenters and YouTube, you'll notice like especially if the person doesn't, whoever the YouTuber is that makes the video doesn't have chapters, but it's interesting or whatever, commenters will put in, more often than not, will put in a chapter.
Really?
Put in the chapters.
I didn't know you could do that. That's kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah. To kind of like skip over the whatever, they'll have, anybody can do it, I guess. So I don't know what happens if the person actually does it or what, but I've seen that. Or maybe it's just one of those things where they don't actually add chapters to the video. Only the person's video, whose video it is, can do that. But they actually, put the same format, and you could click on the little number, like 00:16, and it'll take you 16 seconds into the video.
I wonder if that's what they're doing, because you can share a link in YouTube and And when you share the link, say, start at this point.
Start at. Yep. Yep. Yep.
Now, the interesting thing is that Google, or I should say YouTube, it's Google, but YouTube
Yeah, it's Google.
has a new algorithm to automatically add chapter markers to videos, which
Oh, wow.
I've seen in practice. I know that the YouTuber I'm watching has not added chapter markers, but YouTube adds them automatically. And darn if they're not really accurate for the topic that's about to be covered. So clearly some sort of AI is involved here that's, listening to what's about or is being talked about and then adding a chapter marker at the beginning of that.
Yeah.
And there is a
Wow.
check mark in the YouTube studio to say allow YouTube to do this, allow YouTube to add automatic chapter markers. However,
Interesting.
if you do what I do and add your own, then the chapter markers that you add yourself override anything that YouTube might automatically add. So the chapter
is
markers
good.
you see in these for macOS only videos are manually crafted, handcrafted by Mike.
By yourself.
Yes. They're artisan chapter markers. They're not
They're
not
boutique.
automated. There's no AI or there's no I intelligence in these chapter markers at all because it's me. It's me doing them. So there you go.
Awesome.
So one thing we need to do before we start, speaking of which, before we start the episode, is we need to get the presentation scene set up. I was unable to set up the presentation scene with a screen share. So let's see if we can get that set up. And
Okay.
this will be some of the warts and all stuff that people get to participate in. So I'm going to switch to the scene I kind of pre-configured. And you'll see that what we have is this area here. Oh, wait, you can't see what I'm pointing to. The main area is
Yeah.
where we're going to put the screen share.
Right.
And then we've got the little circle down here in the bottom that's going to be you, as you.
I kind of like the duplicates. Maybe you could put up like 3 more circles of me, like in each corner, and we could just look at me talking for the rest of the. I'm just kidding. I don't want to see anymore. That's good. I like that. How about that's even better? Multiple squares of you covering me. That would be.
There.
Yeah. No, you don't. That sucks.
How many more should I add?
That it'll probably overload it. We're probably taking a risk now. It's funny. It's still working. So
I can add me too. See? There we go.
Hey,
There.
this looks like we have actually more people on the show.
I know.
So this is
All right. Let me get rid of those. Let's set this up. Let's get back to real stuff here. Getting rid of it's
Yeah.
fun. It's fun what you can do with this. All right.
it's totally cool.
So let's do a screen share and see if we can't get this set up the way that we had it set up the other day.
Yeah. Yeah, because that was pretty slick.
By the way, while you're getting that set up, I did install Swift Playgrounds because I wanted to just kind of have an idea what we're gonna. I'm gonna very much benefit from this conversation myself. I haven't done any coding in years, so just understanding where we can start, some of the structure that we're going to talk about, and things like that is.
And you still won't with me here.
Well,
there'll be nothing that you'll learn. You'll learn more than probably just digging around Swift Playgrounds. And
hey, I did my own, all on my own, thanks to your guidance the other day. I did my own little control structure based on our little intro snippet of code that we came up with the other day. So I did a if loop that ran
cool.
through and printed the contents 10 times on screen. Like, hey, it worked.
Oh, cool.
It worked.
Yeah, that's great.
And
That's
a
awesome.
Swift very kindly guided me through the process, which I thought was nice.
Oh, that's neat. You know, I was going to say too, you were right. I guess Swift Playgrounds was created for new programmers or people to get into coding. And, you know, what was odd? I could have swore that it started its life out in Xcode, inside of Xcode. And even the name kind of lends itself to like a playground, something that developers could play around with. But I guess when I searched for it, that's kind of what I found was that it's for newbies. But I don't, I don't remember that for some reason. But
Once in a great while, I kind of know what I'm talking about, but I was not
no,
sure. I was not sure in that
usually
case.
usually you always do, and I'm always wondering why do I disagree? Why do I? But then, especially on some of the things where I feel like that no, that's not what it is. And I didn't like look up at like search and search and search, but the couple of things I did find was definitely you know interesting anyway. I mean, it was pretty much exactly what you said.
Well, I'm going to just temporarily add myself here until you're ready with the screen share.
Okay, I'm
So,
ready. I think. Oh, do I just need to turn it on?
yeah, yeah. Go ahead and turn it
Okay.
on.
Okay. Yep. Sorry. Let's do it. Give me 1 second. Okay. All
Oh,
right.
oh. Let's
So
see. Let me. Oh, you know what I can do? I think. Oh, I can assign this to a guest. Oh, that. Okay, we didn't do that the other day. That didn't work the other day. I can assign it to a guest so that
oh,
now I can just say this is going to be guest two. Boom. Okay. Now
okay.
let
Cool.
me.
Now I did not. Let's see. Uh, oops.
I think if you just bump the
Yeah, I just want to see
text
if the.
size.
Yeah, I forgot. I think I turned it down. How is that? Bigger?
Yeah, let's go bigger.
Oops. What's going on? I just deleted it.
Oh, that should be good. That should be good.
This should be good. Okay.
We don't have anyone watching to ask right at the moment.
No. Well, you. It seems like that should be because I mean, it's like almost probably half the size of our pictures. So
Let me try something. Let me see if I can.
gosh.
No, see, it's doing the same. It's putting a border around it. I don't know why it's doing that border around it, but I
Yeah.
think as long as we can do, I think as long as we can do this, as long as we can make the font bigger like that, we're in good shape.
Okay. Yeah. So it's funny that um, yeah, that border thing is weird. Oh, you know what? Let me hang on a second. This Swift Playgrounds is actually kind of cool. Um, the one thing I did run into, if you try to do anything a little bit more, I guess a little bit more involved, you do run into some weird errors where it'll say that not supported in Catalyst, or this is not supported in Catalyst, whatever. And I think what it is because this is based off the iPad version of Swift Playgrounds. I think it
Yeah.
kind of got its start there, and so the Mac version then doesn't like if the iPad version doesn't actually, or if the iPad doesn't actually support that, then the Mac version of Swift Playgrounds doesn't either.
Well, I want to ask you about that once we start recording. In fact, you can even look it up now if you want to, but I could not for the life of me find an iPad version of this.
Oh, really? Of Swift Playgrounds?
Nope.
Yeah, it's like grab my.
No iPad version.
Oops. I know I got it on my iPad. Yeah. Yeah, and the battery's dead. So never mind about that. Let's see. Oh, you know what? I can do this. Obviously, it's been a little bit since I've used my iPad. The battery's dead.
You might have a version of it, but I couldn't find one in the App Store.
Really? That is odd because okay, so what iPad do you have?
Well, I was searching the. Oh, you know what? You know what? I wonder if it didn't work because I was searching the App Store from my Mac.
Oh, I bet. I bet.
That could be why it didn't work.
Yeah, because I was just gonna check the App Store here.
Let's make sure of that because it probably won't be available on the iPhone, will it?
No, actually, I was just gonna check it right now.
Yeah, I can't. Okay, so maybe it didn't come up because I was on. It was a Apple Silicon Mac, but
Yeah.
and it allowed me to search the App Store, but I wonder if that's why it didn't come up.
No, that's what it is because actually I'm looking in the iPad App Store right now, and I've got an update to it. So it's bringing up Swift Playgrounds, and it shows that there's an update to it. So
Can you text me the direct link to the iPad version of it?
yeah,
Can you share the link to it?
yeah.
And I'll add it to the notes.
Shoot,
Okay, I have it on you right now.
come on.
I wonder why we couldn't.
What's going on?
Okay, I'm going to lock that scene.
Let's try this again.
Haha, look at that.
To
Okay. Oh, you know what I could do? I could be even fancier. Let me.
now, is this still?
Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to move this. I'm going to move me over here.
I think we should have ourselves like Hollywood Squares, and I want Hal Linden's old spot. Wasn't he in the middle?
Oops.
No one's gonna remember that. No one's gonna even know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about.
Okay.
Hal Linden, that's awesome.
Yeah, don't you remember? He was so awesome. And okay.
Okay. Oh, Barney Miller reference there.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fancy. Okay, now we're fancy. I don't think we're going to need. I don't think my mug is going to be in the way of what we need for this.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be right in the way because I'm gonna. Yeah, we're gonna be coding like nuts. Yeah, no, you're right. It's not going to be in the way. Okay. Here you go. I just sent you the link to Swift Playgrounds on
Cool.
the iPad.
I can add that to the show notes.
Yeah.
Okay, here. So set up live while we were talking. Check this out. So here's switching to the screen share. Boom.
Nice.
Yeah,
Look at
see?
that. Oh,
Fly-ins.
that's yes. In fact, I actually got a little dizzy from that fly-in. It's nice.
Oh, I wonder if we can do, let's see. I can do from top, left, bottom. I was wondering if I could do like a spin in or something, but to make you dizzy.
Yeah, yeah. Spinning would be great.
And it doesn't look like I can. All right.
Even
I
if you could,
think
like roll me in.
that would be cool too. Looks like it's only fly-ins though.
Yeah.
Now, do you want to be a circle or do you want to be a squircle? So you could be a squircle too.
Squircles are cool too. Yeah, I like the circle. Circles are good.
All right, well, we'll keep you a circle. There you go.
Squircles are nice too, but
Squircles. All right, well, good. We're all set up. I think we're ready to go. Why didn't allow me to do that as a guest when we did this the other day? I don't know, but it's working now, and that's really cool.
maybe because you had the beta version, now it's the newly improved, updated version.
Maybe.
That's a good
Maybe.
question. I don't know.
Oh, wow, it's interesting. Wow, I wonder what happened there. The bandwidth requirements went way up when I switched. Let's see. No, that's okay. Back to us. Oh, yeah, so it's like when I switch to the two of us camera view, it goes boing, it spikes way up and then comes back down again.
But then it's fine when we do the little fly-in and it's still the two of us. That's interesting. It's a bigger picture.
It's fine there. All right.
Wow.
Well, then we should get going, I think.
Let's start.
Was that your Sean Connery impression?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's start.
I seem to be able to do him when I'm not meaning to. So, I mean, I've done it in the past, and your son's one of yours to the hospital. Sorry, go ahead.
Mine is not Sean Connery. Mine is like what's the actor's name? Yeah, see, yeah, blah.
Oh, yeah. It's like James Cagney.
James
Or,
Cagney.
no.
Yeah, yeah, see.
Yeah. See.
It's not Sean Connery, it's James Cagney. Yes. That's Sean Connery. Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Miss Moneypenny.
Yes. That's right. Thank you, Q.
Oh, goodness gracious. You'd think we'd been recording for an hour based on how loopy we seem to be. All right.
I
30,
know. Actually, I think it just doesn't take us that long.
38 minutes and 15 seconds. Here we go. We're going to get started. In 3, 2, 1. It's For Mac Guys Only, episode number 407 for April 14th, 2023. Print. Hello, Eric. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to For Mac Guys Only, the show for the Mac community, where we share our thoughts and opinions on current Mac news and events. And joining me to guide us on our journey into coding is my For Mac Guys Only co-host, Eric Erickson. Hey, Eric.
Print. Hello, Mike.
It is so awesome to have you back on the show again. We missed you last time, of course.
Yeah, and I missed you too. So yeah, this is good.
I invited Jeff to come back on when we are both on the show again.
Oh yeah. But
You know what? Side note, you seem to be a little quiet now.
I'm quiet. What did I do? Okay.
Let's see if I
Okay,
can bump your
so
volume up a little bit on this end, but I think it.
let me see. I think I still have it on auto. Oh, okay. Maybe is it better? Am I? Oh, wait a minute. Okay, I think
Oh,
something happened. Okay, how
all
about
right.
now?
Now we're better. Now we're better.
Okay, good.
All right.
I think I bumped something. Sorry.
No problem. Back to recording. So, blah, 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 blah. I'm all thrown off now. And for any of you joining us live, I'll be keeping an eye on the chat room too. So if you have questions or comments as we move along, be sure to preface it with a Q or the word question, and we'll try to address it as we go through the episode. Well, Eric, before we get started hacking away on our Macs, is there anything going on in the world of Apple that's piqued your interest these past couple weeks?
Not that I can think of. Just trying to think of. Yeah, there's been some news out there, but let's see. The one thing I did see was apparently they were working on a monitor that would kind of fall in between the XDR display and their studio display. It would have the, I don't know, but if the resolution would be any different or the screen size would be any different, but it would have, a variable screen refresh, so you would at least have 120 hertz. I think be HDR, brighter and all that stuff. So, but it sounds like they just stopped with that. So I don't know. And I think also, yeah, it would be OLED possibly, or at least support the mini LED with multiple dimming zones and all that stuff that they have in their iPad and XDR, or as their XDR display, I should say, whether it's an iPad or the big 32-inch. But apparently they gave that up, and nobody knows why. So that's a little upsetting. But actually, they think too that it could be just something saved for later, that maybe they'll include it with the iMac. I think a lot of people still think that 27-inch iMac or whatever it's going to be, the iMac Pro, the higher end version is still going to be a thing. My thought on that, I don't think that's probably going to be a thing, but I don't know. I think that's the Mac Studio, to be honest with you. But it's other than that, I just saw. It sounds like Mac sales are slumping, and it kind of seems to me that they went great guns with the M1, and maybe instead of saying that the Mac Pro, every Mac in their lineup is going to be updated with the new Apple Silicon, they should have said every Mac in their lineup is going to be updated with the Mac Silicon or Apple Silicon, except for the Mac Pro, and we'll still be using
Right.
Intel chips for the foreseeable future, and to keep it something that professionals want and need, until we can actually create something. And then it seemed like, again, too, they came out with the M2 relatively quickly, and it sounds like it's a big jump. But I don't know if the if we're waiting on the M3, and if they're as big of a jumps as the M1 initially was from Intel, and of course it's not going to be, but maybe they're running into some constraints with their chips that they didn't expect to, but it seems like it's slowed down a little bit.
I wonder, in a way, if they've designed themselves into a corner too with the iMac. They made it so thin and left so very little room in there for thermals. Maybe there's some sort of issue with that.
Although I read someplace that there's actually a lot of unused space, I guess. Well, in the big iMac, I don't know about the 24-inch. And you'd think with their new Apple Silicon that they wouldn't need, they wouldn't worry about it getting overheated. Although I don't know, who knows? It's I can tell you with my MacBook Pro, my 16-inch M1 Max, it gets a little warm. I mean, it gets warm sometimes, but I've never heard the fans run. I'm sure they're running, but on my Intel Mac, if my screensaver was running a little long, or not even a little long, I mean, if I was running Arabic Abyss or whatever it is, the fans would blow up. I mean, it was just like, just about anything, and maybe it was good because it kind of kept me from doing stuff. But
Ah,
it's it's but I've never heard that with this, so I can assume that the other Apple Silicon, you know, one thing I kind of am a little, or it kind of made me wonder a little bit, is the PowerPC chip. Remember the promise of the PowerPC chip when that came out? It was going to be reduced instruction set, and it was going to be all this and that. It was going to leave Intel in the dust, and then it never really happened. The reduced instruction set was like a great idea, but it never actually, in the end, it didn't seem like it was able to keep up with Intel and Intel's chips. And it almost, you wonder, like, is that going to happen here too? Is Intel going to adapt? And I mean, is there a certain thing where you can be too reduced and, and you end up having to have these tools and you don't, and, maybe your chip isn't as fast as it could be, obviously, it's great to not have it run as hot, but, I don't know. I don't know what they're up against or, what they're running into, obviously, but, for some reason, I just thought they'd be pouring out these chips and, now your Mac would be 3 times faster. And it was probably stupid for me to think that, but, I guess it is what it is.
well, this actually came up on Dave's show last night, In Touch with iOS. He had me on as a guest, which was awesome. And I honestly can't remember if we talked about this. I think we talked about this after recording ended. But we were talking about Apple's events. And, certainly we have one coming up in June. WWDC is coming up. But I really thought we might have one in April, quite frankly. It's been...
March was talked about too.
It's been, what, 2 years, 3 years since the 24-inch iMac came out? When did that come out? 2021?
2021.
Yeah, so it's been 2 years.
2021.
And it seems as if, look, the MacBook Air, the Mac Mini, the Mac Studio hasn't been upgraded yet, but that just came out last summer.
Right.
It seems as if that 24-inch iMac is starting to get a little long in the tooth. And so I said, wow, I'm really surprised we haven't had some sort of an announcement of an April event. And granted, often Apple just announces those things, 4, 5, 6, 7 days ahead of time at most. But isn't it time for there to be an M2 iMac? And
right.
I can't remember if it was Dave or Ben. One of the two of them said, but, the M1 iMac runs great. Yeah, it runs great, but it's got those limitations of the M1 when it first came out. It's got the memory limitation. There is not a Pro or Max version of it. And and I know Ben Rathig said, hey, what would be great about a new iMac is put that M2 in it and then make the M2 Pro available in it as well.
Yeah.
And so not only from a thermal standpoint, but I also wonder from a lineup standpoint if Apple has kind of designed themselves into a corner here where we have this amazing Mac Mini, which makes it blows away almost anything out there on the desktop for $600.
Yeah.
And so you got the $600 computer competing with a $1,300 iMac. And the iMac comes with that gorgeous 24-inch display, but you can buy a gorgeous 24-inch display. You don't need that one.
You don't need it. Yep.
And you'd still end up paying about the same. And if you already have a display, if you already have a keyboard, you already have a mouse, why the iMac? And now take that 24-inch iMac and put the M2 Pro in it, and then why have the Mac Studio?
Right.
It's like you because you're going to start pricing that way too close to the entry-level Mac Studio, which in theory should blow away the 24-inch iMac.
Right.
So they're in this like really weird place right now where each iteration of the Apple Silicon processors is kind of putting them, behind the eight ball, as it were, in where to slot all these different computers in the lineup.
And
I don't know.
I don't know either, and that's a really good point. And they've always said they're not afraid to cannibalize their own market or cannibalize their own products, but I don't
And
think
they
they
do.
probably intended to do this. And no, I think you're exactly right. I don't know. You wonder where the iMac even fits in right now, and especially with the studio, because when they didn't have the studio, and in fact, if they didn't have the studio now, people would be screaming for a 27-inch iMac or something like that, because there's just nothing there. And the studio has been is really fitting nice. But even like you said, they did come out with it last summer, and it does have the M1 Ultra, so it probably. And I think if I read something that they weren't going to come out with an M2, or it probably would be M3 before they updated the studio. So, there is that. But yeah, who knows? It's and and the other thing is, and of course, we've heard about Apple's glasses, their AR, VR headset glasses,
Right.
whatever it is. And now I've heard more and more, and to be honest with you, and the rumored price is always going to put me off too. But I've heard kind of where I've read some stuff where they've maybe showed them off to some people, and the responses have been lackluster and kind of like, I don't know what I would use these for. And I think that's, we don't know if they'll hold it back or whatever. But to me, and of course, I would have probably said this same thing about the phone. So I'm probably no good to ask. I probably said when there were rumors about the phone, they should just be working on computers. Don't worry about that. And I
Yeah,
would
what
have
am I
been
going to
wrong.
use that for?
Right. Already got a phone, already got an iPod. But it does seem like something that even if it was reasonably priced, let's say at $300 or something, I just don't know how much I'd be interested in something like that. I don't. And I think that's probably true for a lot of people. It's,
Yeah. Yeah,
I mean,
VR or AR,
yeah,
I think AR has a lot more augmented reality. Let me put it that way. Augmented reality
yep,
versus virtual reality. I think augmented reality has much more promise than virtual reality when it comes
yeah,
to the everyday user, the consumer,
yeah,
the people who are buying iPhones and Apple Watches and MacBook Airs and iMacs are consumers.
right,
There's definitely space in the pro market for VR, virtual reality,
right.
designers, animators. There,
Gamers.
yeah, there's so many practical applications for VR there, but is that market really large enough for Apple to jump into with both feet with virtual reality?
Right. Especially with players already in there pretty
Yeah, and
strong.
and gaming, which
Yeah.
look, we talk about gaming on Macs until we're blue in the face, and it's not going to improve things. It's just
No.
not. It's not picking, even though the technology is there. Apple devices. I mean, it is on iOS, I guess, to a certain extent. No, to a big extent. Let me put it that way. To a big
Yeah.
extent, gaming's huge on iOS, but
iOS. Yeah.
the Mac certainly has the chops to run many, if not all, of the biggest games that are out there right now, but there just isn't a market for it, and the developers aren't porting stuff over.
Doing it. No.
So,
That is the funniest thing because it never has been. The
no,
Mac has had games, and in fact, some of the bigger, initial, like Mist and all that kind of came from a Mac, but it never. It's really never been a good gamer's machine, and has kept people away. And I think it even started maybe from the beginning when they didn't want it to be seen as a toy and as a gaming
yeah,
machine, and it's never been, which is kind of odd when you think about it. But yeah, it's never, and it doesn't seem like it's ever going to be. It's never gonna. gain momentum that way.
Yeah, personal computing should have a certain leisure aspect to it. And there is. I mean, there have been and are some amazing games for the Mac, but it's just
Yeah.
not seen as a gaming platform. And part of it is to, especially from the most devout gamers, is that lack of upgradability, the lack of expansion, whether it's Linux or whether it's Windows, the ability to tear down a box and upgrade it and replace parts and stuff is critical to the that core gaming market. And it's
Right.
just something the Mac is never ever going to do. It never has. Well, maybe the early to mid 90s it was, when the beige box period, that maybe you
Right.
could tear those
Right.
down and upgrade them and things like that, but it never really
Yeah.
has been a machine. I mean, look at the original classic Mac, where you had to use a special tool that was nicknamed the Mac Tracker because you had to get that driver way down that deep hole and undo the torque screw. It wasn't a fancy screw; it was a torque screw, but you had to have a tool long enough to reach down in there and get to that screw so you could take the darn computer apart.
Yeah,
And
there was the Jobsonian way. I mean, he wanted it as an appliance. You weren't supposed. I mean, in fact, I think the people working, was it Burl and Hertzfeld and all that. I mean, they wanted to be able to open the computer and make modifications to it. And I think they kind of went against that and made it so you could, but it still was difficult. And it's always kind of had that. And yeah,
I think we're but a single step away from Apple gluing the bottom of MacBook Pros onto them, and instead of using the, what is it, 4, 5, 6 screws that they're using right now.
right,
What's the point of having the screws? Quite frankly,
right.
there's
Well,
nothing
'cause they have to
serviceable
change the
inside.
battery.
Yeah,
Right.
there you go. Well, same holds for the iPhone, and they glue those darn things together.
They glue
So
that. Although they do actually have two screws right at the bottom, right by the lightning port, which I always thought was really odd for Apple to even have screws there. So they must have, and they started doing that a while ago. So they must have gotten sick of having to crack it open somehow. So I don't know.
well, the screws. Even on some of the oldest iPhones, when it used to be easier to replace the screen or easier to replace the glass, or the screen and the glass were separate pieces and whatnot, the two screws were there and you could take them out. You still had to heat up and release the glue holding it together.
Oh yeah,
But that held the top frame. The top frame would kind of slip into the bottom frame and then go together, and then two screws held that top frame down there in place, even though it was glued as well. And I think it's just kind of necessary for the day-to-day stresses that are put on the device, so that it's not
yeah,
dependent fully upon the glue strips. We've seen plenty of photos of Apple Watches where the glasses popped off of them, and it's because there isn't anything else other than the glue strips holding it on. And if something happens,
oh yeah,
often it's because the battery has swollen in them.
yeah.
But there have been other instances where we see that top glass just kind of separating from the case, and there's nothing else holding it other than the glue strip. So I think that probably has something to do with it.
I bet that's probably a good point.
That doesn't lend to why the iPad doesn't have those screws. But then again,
Yeah,
it's not. The iPad doesn't get that same kind of heavy daily use that the iPhone does. So
no,
there must be an engineering reason for it that if we haven't hit on it just now, somebody else will tell us about.
somebody else will say what it is.
Well, you know me,
You're
I
right.
like to latch on to the weird. And this kind of ties into our conversation today about coding on the Mac, because I was really tickled to read that a Bitcoin white paper was hidden in every
Yeah,
modern copy of Mac OS. That is just amazing. It's in programming terms, it's known as an Easter egg, right?
yeah,
And we have Easter eggs going all the way back to the game Adventure on the Atari 2600, or the VCS. The original Atari.
yeah.
We had that game Adventure, and if you played the game just right. You could get into the secret room and see the message, the hidden message that the developer put in there. And I can't remember, that wasn't David Crane, I don't think. But the person who wrote Adventure stuck his name in that hidden room. And we also had other Easter eggs in, Microsoft Excel had I'm going from memory here, but had a hidden flight simulator in it.
I don't know if it was a flight simulator, but it was a 3D. I almost wanted to say it was an FPS, but I don't think it was that. Maybe it was some sort of flight simulator.
I thought it was a flight simulator, but again, I'm going from memory here, so I don't really remember. But
I
Easter eggs
playing around with it.
Yeah, they're kind of a time-honored tradition, and I would qualify this as an Easter egg. It's a somewhat bizarre one because it actually is made public to the people using the software. So this is part of image capture, and apparently, and I've never seen this, apparently there is a device that can be installed on some Macs called Virtual Scanner 2. Now, I've never seen Virtual Scanner 2. The guess is that it somehow has to do with the import from iPhone feature. But the interesting thing was, the way they found this is they were messing around in, this article is from Andy Bio, and it's on the blog waxy.org. And it turns out that he was messing around in image capture. Let's see if I can find where it said, well, it doesn't matter what he was doing. He was doing something in image capture and came across Virtual Scanner 2, selected it, and if you set things up just right, if you set the media to document and the DPI to 72 DPI, you get a preview of the first page of this Bitcoin paper. Now that is bizarre. Normally Easter eggs are pretty well hidden. This seems like something that can easily be stumbled across, but it also does have very specific requirements. Again, Virtual Scanner 2, media type to document, and media DPI to 72 DPI, but a lot of that are defaults. So it's not a super well hidden Easter egg. Now, people are asking why. Look, just because. Programmers, coders put these Easter eggs into apps just because they can. I put an Easter egg into a Flash animation that I developed for work 12 years ago. We were, I might have told this story on For Mac Is Only before, but we were creating an animated holiday card to send out to customers. And my friend and I had, also an employee there, had been doing these for like 4 or 5 years. And this final one that we developed for the company, we were having a little fun with it. And, there's this penguin in it, and the penguin was skiing, and it jumped a hill, and we put in the $6 million man, or, $6 million, Jamie Summers, $6 million woman jumping sound, that boing, 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 we put that in there.
Right. Yeah.
And then we had a couple other things in there that, when we brought it to the committee, there's always a committee, brought it to the committee and showed it to them. They're like, what's that noise? Well, what do you mean, what's that noise? How do you not know the $6 million man jumping sound?
Yeah. You don't want to show it to a committee. It's never.
And yet, they had to approve it before we sent it out. So we got frustrated because they basically made us remove all the sound effects, not just that jumping sound, but all the sound effects. The penguin skidding to a stop, the other sound effects. They made us change the music. Like pretty much everything that they didn't understand had to come out of it. And yet that removed all the humor from the card. So I put in an Easter egg. I researched this. I researched how to create a secret keystroke in Flash so that when someone pressed this special keystroke combination, and it was like 5 keys you had to press together in the right order, then Papa Smurf would pop out from behind a tree, and say, "That's the Christmas spirit, my little Smurfs." And
Yeah, that's awesome.
that was, that was just my little rebellion. Nobody ever saw it. Nobody ever saw it. When the company closed down, I showed
You
my
can't ever-
boss. I showed it to my
Yeah.
boss. And he was like, "Oh my gosh, was that in there all this time?" I said, "Yep, that was in there all this time."
All the
Said,
time,
"It doesn't
yeah.
matter now, but that was in there all this time." So sometimes it's acts of rebellion like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just for fun. Sometimes it's
Just
to give
playful.
yourself a little credit. Like the Atari 2600.
Name.
Nobody got credit for the games that they designed
No.
for Atari.
Yeah, especially back then.
Yeah.
That's why a bunch of them left and created Activision.
Activision credited their game developers, which was amazing. They had whole write-ups in the back of them. Yes, we had manuals with the games. In the back of the manuals that came with the games, they had whole write-ups in there spotlighting the developer of that game, which was just amazing. So there's all kinds of reasons these Easter eggs might exist, but I just found it amusing that this was in image capture, and it's apparently been in there since Mojave, since 10.14, and it's still there in Ventura 13.3. So this is pretty awesome.
Did it show up in Mojave because that's when image capture? Wasn't it Grabber? Was image capture always there? Maybe it was.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure when it showed up in there. It could be too when the developer joined Apple. Who knows?
Yeah.
But
Right.
the most annoying thing, why do I keep saying that? But the most amusing thing about this entire story is that this was actually filed as an issue, as a bug within Apple almost a year ago. But the thing is, they assigned the issue to the exact
To the
same
developer.
engineer who put it there in the first place.
Yeah. So he wasn't
So
in a
guess
hurry
what?
to fix it.
It
Yeah.
didn't get taken out.
Yeah.
But now that it's been discovered, you can imagine, possibly even in 13.3.1, which just came out,
Yeah, it's gone.
it may be gone. I haven't looked. I only just upgraded my Macs this week to the 0.1 version, but I did check last week, and it was in Ventura 13.3. Yeah.
It seems pretty harmless.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
to me, but
It really is. But
Yeah.
I enjoy those kind of stories, and I
I
just
do
thought
too.
I'd mention it for anyone who didn't hear about this. I'll put a link to that story in the show note. Now,
yeah, that is a good one.
the other story that caught my attention, of course, is the new book put out by the Steve Jobs Archive. Now, the Steve Jobs Archive has been around for, it's been around for several years now. I can't remember when I first bookmarked it in my browser, but it's been around. There hasn't been a whole lot of information on it, a little bit here and there. But they just released, and this has been in all the Apple blogs, but if for some reason you didn't hear about this, they just released a new ebook, a new collection of Steve Jobs speeches and interviews and emails. This is pretty amazing because
that's cool.
not only is this just kind of a collection of content that he's produced throughout the years, but it goes way back to even include his childhood. So there's information in here from his childhood, the time away from Apple. When he was dumped by Apple in 85. Was it 85?
85. Yep, 85, and then
Dumped by Apple in 85. His time with Pixar, and Next, of course, or
Yeah.
Next and Pixar, I should say.
Yeah.
And then, of course, his return to Apple. So, like I said, there's speeches, there's interviews, there's other correspondence, email correspondence, things like that, all collected together, all curated and put together by Mr. Jobs' widow, Lorraine Jobs. So,
That's nice.
yeah, so that's nice. And this is available on Apple Books. It's also available as a direct download from the Steve Jobs Archive. and that is stevejobsarchive.com. If you go there, it's right on the homepage, and you can download it directly from them. And my only wish, I think my only wish, if I were to have one, is I would like to see a hard copy made available. This is such a cool collection of information that I don't know why it wouldn't be turned into a physical book.
Oh, yeah. Isn't some of it like audio or video clips though?
It
Or
could
is it
be.
all
It
print? Yeah.
it could. I downloaded the EPUB version of it, and have gone
Oh,
through a
yeah.
little bit of it, but I did not download the Apple Books edition.
Okay.
I did note that a copy
Then,
of it
yeah.
was distributed to Disney's employees.
Oh, cool.
So,
Oh, okay.
Jobs, of course, founded or helped found Pixar, or kind of bought Pixar, didn't he? He bought Pixar.
He bought Pixar in '86 from George Lucas,
Yeah,
and
yeah, he bought
Lucas got
Pixar.
it. I think the guy that's been there forever, or kind of from the beginning, was Lasseter. It's kind of weird too if you look back in the '70s when they first used polygons to create 3D images like of a face. It's almost kind of creepy, They had the head, and this was like black and white, like '75. It was
Yeah,
really kind of incredible. But Jobs bought it to basically package and sell RenderMan, or eventually kind of to do that. But it was so complicated to use that and expensive that very few businesses bought it. But what's his name? I think it was Lasseter. Maybe it was a different. Kept making little short animations and winning awards. And I think Luxo was the first, and going on from there. And so Jobs is like, you know what, and then the joint venture with Disney and Toy Story was born, and all the rest is history.
yeah, and I think I misspoke a little bit. I said it was compiled by Lorraine Powell Jobs, and that is not correct. It actually features an introduction by
By
Lorraine
her.
Powell Jobs. It was edited by Leslie Berlin. So that's the correct information there. So what I was leading towards is, of course, he was very, after he bought Pixar, very actively involved in making it the Pixar that we know and love today, up to the point where Disney purchased Pixar, and Jobs
Yeah.
joined Disney's board of directors and ultimately formed a friendship with Bob Iger, who is once again the CEO of Disney.
Yeah.
And I just happen to see, I don't have this link here. I happened to see it go by on Mastodon the other day, but apparently Iger distributed copies of this to employees of Disney and explained in the letter he included with it his close friendship with Jobs, and how he, would often rely on Jobs as a confidant or advisor when it came to making decisions at Disney. And of course, mentioned he
That's interesting.
misses him very much
Yeah.
in the year since Jobs' passing in 2011. So anyway, it's a neat collection. It's available for free. You can download it directly from stevejobsarchive.com, or you could search for Make Something Wonderful in the Apple bookstore.
Yeah, that's good. I gotta check that out. I'm usually a sucker for Steve Jobs stuff, and I usually read all about it, like it.
I will point this out. I did start browsing it on the Steve Jobs archive, and if you haven't looked at it yet, when you first go to browse it, you'll see on the cover of the book is what looks to be a Polaroid photo of Steve Jobs. Well, when you browse it on the website, that photo develops in front of your eyes as you're looking at the cover, just like a Polaroid photo would develop as it came out
Oh,
of the camera and
cool.
you had to wait for it to, be
Yep.
shaking it. even though that
Right.
had
Right.
nothing to do with the photo actually developing. You would always shake it,
No,
right?
but you just was fun to do. You
It was
thought
just
so.
fun to do. Well, and then the photo would slowly develop in front of your eyes. Well, that's what happens when you're looking at the the online version of the book, not the EPUB version, obviously, but the online version of it.
Right.
The photo develops in front of your eyes, which is really cool. And there's a lot of little things like that built into the web version of the book that
That's
definitely
cool.
makes it worth checking out. Even if you download the EPUB version, be sure to check out the web version as well, just to get some of that extra stuff. And like you said, the videos and things like that wouldn't otherwise be embedded in a book, in an ebook. So
Yeah.
so there's that. Okay. What do you think, Eric? Should we get on to coding?
Yeah. Yeah. We sure could. We sure. I
All
mean,
right.
now that, yeah. Now, now we can put people to sleep. We can, if they need a nap or something, we can help them with that. Maybe we should have some nice, like lullaby music playing in the background.
Well, look, first, for anyone who's a little concerned about this topic, I want to mention that what we're doing here is for everyone. Everyone who's listening to the show, for Mac Guys Only has always kind of been the every person show. We don't try to target
Right.
developers. We don't try to target business professionals. We don't try to target only end users. We try to we try to bring everybody into the For Mac Guys Only community. And we're going to try to do that with the coding as well. So this is really designed for everyone. Of course, especially those who are new to coding, but also to those who've maybe dabbled in coding at some point in the past and are interested in picking it up again. And I would put myself in that category. While there are a virtual ton of other languages to choose from, and we actually talked about a number of them in episode 404 and got some really fun emails from some of the listeners who talked about their early days of coding and definitely recognized a lot of themselves in what we described, from our early days. We're going to be going with Swift. And
Right.
the reason we're going with that is, well, there's a few reasons. Some of the reasons that come to my mind are the tools needed to get started. They're freely available. You can grab them from the Mac App Store, the iOS App Store. You can get them. They're free. You don't have to go through any extreme measures to get a development environment to code in Swift. Swift is very Apple, right? Apple created the language Swift. So it kind of seems appropriate to maybe talk about it. Apple provides a ton of great resources for learning to code in Swift, some of which I'll mention in just a moment. And quite frankly, and I did mention this before we started recording the show, as someone who's never coded in Swift before, at first glance, as I'm going through some of the stuff that I went through to get ready for the show, it really seems relatively easy to understand. So I guess what I'm saying is if you're an experienced coder, stick around for the ride. But we're going to be starting pretty basic here. No pun intended. We're going to be starting pretty basic. But I'm
Really basic.
hoping, but I'm hoping that after a few episodes in which we build upon what we're going to be talking about today, and we build upon the things that we've learned in previous episodes, maybe we're going to get to the point where we can give ourselves a little project to complete and actually, create something useful.
Yeah. I think that's terrific. In fact, actually, it would be neat to see how other people, especially listeners, if people try different stuff to hear what they've come up with, or even, working out the project. I mean, I think that sounds terrific. And
Yeah.
again, Swift, and we talked about this too, because you looked at some other stuff too. I mean, like we were talking about Future Basic, and I had said, what do we want to do here? And there's a number of great languages out there that, and it really comes down to, really their tools, and depending upon what you're trying to do, there's usually a language for it, and or usually a better language for it. Swift, and you may have heard of other languages like Java, and even like what we talked about, or C++, something like that, or even Objective C, which is another language that Apple uses, are all general purpose languages that you can use for just about anything. But like you said, we kind of focused on Swift because it's a newer language that Apple just created to essentially kind of fix some of the, I don't want to say errors, but some of the disadvantages of using Objective C. And they've made it open source, so not only are you able to use it on, to create Mac apps or iOS apps or do whatever, but it's available on just about any platform to do whatever. And again, I'm not super aware of all the different, Swift installations and stuff, and what you could do with it on Windows, or what development environments exist for that, or Linux or whatnot. But it is open source, and you can also script with it, which is to get, it's a little bit different than it's programming, but it's more or less to, if you're familiar with shortcuts, to automate certain processes rather than write a full-fledged program to, solve some problem. But anyway, going back to what we were talking about with Swift and what Mike mentioned, and having a development environment, normally you need something, if you're going to be writing a computer language, something to write it in, a text editor, and then you need something else to essentially take that text, that that the programming language that you wrote in this case Swift, and compile it into something that the computer can understand and actually run it. And there are text editors out there that will allow you to write stuff in it and highlight syntax, which means color code it, so you can kind of make better sense of it. And there's full-fledged IDEs, or development environments, integrated development environments that exist like Xcode, that take you through that you can essentially go through the whole process of developing a full-fledged app for macOS, iOS, tvOS, whatever. But Apple also has something called Swift Playgrounds, which is really slick because it's one part editor and kind of one part development environment, but it takes a lot of the overhead or the extra stuff that you need to be aware of, and kind of hides it back behind the scenes. So you can write some code in Swift, then you hit the run button and just have it execute and see your results, all without having to, learn how to use Xcode, or to, build this, or to include all this extra code just to run, or, and in fact, you can actually create an app within Swift Playgrounds, or at least the guts of one. And it's quite, it's actually, pretty robust. And I think the Swift Playgrounds that we're working with on the Mac, and I think I mentioned this to you before, is a Mac Catalyst app. And I think it started out its life on the iPad, and again, is for a way for new people to learn code. And also, I will mention too that Swift Playgrounds is available inside of Xcode as well. But it's kind of a new way to learn and develop in Swift. But they've brought it to the Mac, which is kind of a really slick thing. So I was going to say, did we lose the share screen?
I don't know. We'll find that out in just a minute. But you just touched on something I wanted to bring up, and that is, when we're talking about setting up an environment within which to learn to code, why are we suggesting Swift Playgrounds versus Xcode. Xcode is that
Right.
kind of OG development environment that Apple created for doing things like this. So why not do that? And I think you very succinctly pointed out that Swift Playgrounds is, that light version, or that light environment that not only allows you to create a little place to kind of noodle around with little bits of code like we're going to be doing at the very beginning here, but also it's designed to learn more about this very thing we're talking about, which is Swift. And one of the things I noticed when I installed Swift Playgrounds for the first time is that at the very bottom of the screen, it allows you to create a new blank playground and just start typing code and run it, like you
Yeah.
said. But there's also little tutorials down there, and
Yes.
the first few tutorials at the bottom are getting started with code, getting started with apps, organizing with grids, editing grids, choosing your own story, a date planner, recognizing gestures, a meme creator. I mean, these are little things, little tutorials that are built into Swift Playground so that even if you do have experience coding and that experience is not with Swift, you can start playing with some of these pre-built tutorials and kind of jump in with both feet, as it were. You can jump into
Right.
something. I know I want to do, well, let's just pick on date planner. I know I want to do a date planner. How do I get started doing that sort of thing with Swift? Well, you open up that tutorial and it kind of takes you through the process. There are lessons to learn in there, and they step you through it bit by bit. Now, one of the things about Swift Playgrounds that's nice too, over say BB Edit, where you might just type in straight code and then find, as you said, an external means of compiling it into code that can be executed, uh, is it will guide you through the process of entering code. So if you were to enter a command, it will kind of reinsert the structure of that command for you to help you better understand, rather than just saying, oh, well, here's a command, and we're going to be talking about this one in just a minute, print. But here's a command. Good luck figuring out how it works. Instead, it kind of pre-fills in some of the syntax that's required for it to be a valid command when it's run. And so that's another great way to help you kind of, learn that syntax, learn the structure of the Swift programming language, by letting Swift Playgrounds guide you as you move along. So I thought that's kind of cool too.
Yeah. No, it's totally cool.
Now, one thing that's a little frustrating to me about Swift Playgrounds and Xcode both is that if you are new to it and you want to install it on your Mac or your iPad, you have to be running the latest version of those operating systems in order to install it. In other words, to install this on your Mac, you have to be running macOS 13, which I find a little odd that even something like Swift Playgrounds, which is a learning environment, can't be installed on 11 or 12, for example. I understand
At
not
least 12.
10.13,
Right.
but why force people to be on the absolute latest and greatest? I get it from the standpoint of, well, new things have been brought to the table in these operating systems, and if you want to
Right.
take advantage of those new things, you have to, and you want to code to address those new things, you need to be running that version of the operating system. But this is a learning environment, and I kind of wish that Apple would say, all right, Xcode, sure, Mac OS 13, Swift Playgrounds, let's let it run on 11 or 12 instead. I think that would open them up to a broader range of people who want to learn this stuff.
For some reason, I had thought that it was around with 12 at the very least. I guess, though, it wasn't, huh?
No, it was, but if what I'm saying is if you want to install it new, so as
Oh,
as someone new to Swift Playgrounds, I can't open the Mac App Store on a Mac running 12 and install it because it requires 13. If I installed
Okay.
it back, you know, when it was first released, and I don't remember which version of macOS was out when it was first released, but let's say 10.14. If I
Right.
installed it then, sure, I can bring it forward with me as I moved along. But you had to have installed it then. If you're starting out fresh, like many of the folks listening to this are, you have to be on macOS 13 to install it.
I
So I
gotcha.
guess that does raise
Yeah.
the question, and I don't know if you know the answer to this, but are there other ways that people can kind of noodle around with Swift besides Swift Playgrounds and still do so on an older version of macOS?
Yeah. Well, there's obviously different ways you can do it. Obviously, Xcode is one thing, although it doesn't have all of the like we just discussed with Playgrounds as far as the tutorials and all that. But there are other editors and environments out there. The biggest one probably being Visual Studio Code, which is written by Microsoft, which handles a gazillion different languages, and you can actually write your code in it. And it has a text editor that will highlight your syntax, like I was talking about before. Plus, you can actually run it and execute it. And in some ways, it's actually probably a preferable way over Playgrounds, especially if you start to get a little bit more proficient, with the language and doing stuff, just because it has a better Playgrounds tends to get bogged down after a while. It kind of runs a little slow. As I think I ran into that when we were working on this the other day, Mike. And so, but Visual Studio Code is a good example and something that would work great. And you can do other languages in there besides Swift. It's actually it's created by Microsoft and is actually an Electron app, or
Mm.
built-in Electron, which is kind of languages for the web, but being used to write native or like native desktop applications. And it's something that I I'm a big Electron hater and don't like. However, in this particular case, it actually is pretty good. So, as a development environment, something written in Electron, Microsoft did a good job. It's not something I'm going to use 1Password or use Spark Desktop in, but this particular case, it's different. So, yeah,
Okay.
that would be one way. And I think there's probably other editors, and Nova, I think, is another one. Although that might be which is written by the Panic, I think, Panic Software, or
I
the
think
ones
I
that
think it might be Panic. Yeah.
make Transmit. And I'm trying to think if that's just a syntax editor or if that's actually also a code runner, but it very well could be as that as well. So
Okay, so if folks are following along with some of these basic examples that we're talking about in this and some future episodes, they could use Visual Studio Code or they could use something else, even if they're not running Ventura.
right,
Xcode, too, by the way, requires Ventura if you're going to install it new. So if you've never
new,
installed it
right.
before and it's not currently installed in your Mac, you do need to have Ventura to install both Xcode and Swift Playgrounds. Cool.
That's a good point.
The other resource I wanted to mention is Apple's bookstore. Apple, as the developer of Swift, as the developer of Swift Playgrounds and Xcode, you might imagine they provide a ton of great resources for learning this stuff. So not only is there Swift Playgrounds, but there are ebooks available in the Apple bookstore that you can download. And the one that I found that looks pretty good for starting out is called Develop in Swift Fundamentals. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes. There are other great books in the Apple bookstore, including teacher guides and student guides to kind of take you to the next level or that focus on a certain aspect of developing in Swift. But they're there. So if you do search in the Apple bookstore, again, I'll put a link to Develop in Swift Fundamentals in the show notes. But if you do a search in the bookstore, you're going to find some that are for sale. You're going to find some that are free. But if you're looking for really good free resources, look for those that are published by Apple. And they're pretty easy to pick out as you're searching through the Apple bookstore. One thing I wanted to point out, the next step is where to go to type in code, and we'll get to that in just a second. But I wanted to point something out. I installed Swift Playgrounds brand new on my Mac over here, and one thing I noticed is when I first launched Playgrounds, I could see those lessons at the bottom, and what I wanted to do is I just wanted to play, right? I just wanted to play in the playground. So I clicked Playground on the bottom to create a new blank space to enter code. When I double clicked it to open it, I got an error message that said that the file type .playgroundbook could not be opened in Playgrounds, which just seemed really ridiculous. Now, I didn't know if that was some sort of bug with Ventura or bug with Swift Playgrounds or whatnot. It seems to be a bug in Swift Playground. So if you have just installed it and launched it for the very first time and you're having trouble creating a new playground and opening that playground, the way I fixed it is to simply quit Playgrounds and relaunch it. And boom, everything started working. So something wonky was going on with a brand new, fresh launch of Playgrounds that didn't allow me to create and open a new playground. So if you have that problem, don't get frustrated. Just quit and relaunch Playgrounds. And in my case, anyway, that seemed to fix it. So that brings us to, where do we go if we have Swift Playgrounds installed? And I guess I kind of hinted at this just a minute ago, Eric. But where do we go to enter code? If I just want to enter some of the code that we're going to talk about today and try it to run it, just kind of, bare metal run this code, how do I do that in Swift Playgrounds?
So yeah, you would open up Swift Playgrounds and create a new playground, kind of like you were mentioning before. And once you do that, you'll be presented with a blank area where you can type in text. And this is where, again, I don't think I can share my screen, but you can also bring up, see, that's what I'm saying. It's not, for some reason, maybe we waited too long.
Oh, maybe. Why don't you go ahead and try resharing the screen again, and we'll get it in there. Let me know when you're ready with the shared screen. What we're going to do here, folks, is if you're listening to the audio version of this show, we're going to try to describe as best we can what we're talking about here. But I'm also going to direct you to For Mac Guys Only's YouTube channel. So this episode of the show will be available on the YouTube channel as we recorded it, and there will be chapter markers in it. As I always mention at the beginning of the recording, there's going to be chapter markers in it so that you can jump directly to, this part of the show that we're about to start with, so you can watch what we're doing live as we're going through it. But again, we're going to try to describe it as best we can. So what I'm going to do now is switch the camera over, and I'll let Eric take over
here. So it kind of like I've got Playgrounds open, and kind of as Mike was talking about before, you can see at the bottom, you've got options where you can start creating an app, and it's got these tutorials to the right of that. But what we're going to do is we're just going to hit the plus and create a new playground. And so it's just named my playground at this point, and you can rename it to whatever you want. But I'll double click on that, and what it should do is open up. Did we just lose the screen again? I wonder what's...
I think it's when you create the new playground. Maybe that's what's happening, because it's opening another window. There we go.
What's odd is okay, maybe that's it. Okay,
there you go.
And so now, what'd you say?
Oh, we're good to go. Sorry.
Yeah, we're good to go. So now at this point, we've got the playground window open, and then this is where we could actually start typing code. And I'm going to keep that closed because it's going to get confusing. And the way that it's set up is it's set up with a blank sheet like this, and where you can actually start writing your code. And then down below on the right hand side, I might be covering it up. I don't know if you can see it, but it says run my code. And at that point, we can, once we're finished typing the code that we want, and provided that there's no errors, we can click this and it'll run it. And now we'll want to see the output of that run. And to the right of that is like a little document looking thing. And I think my little circle.
Oh, here, let me fix that. I'll get this fixed so that we can show people. Here, I'll just get rid of us.
Sure. There you go. That's good.
There we go. All right.
And so you can see this little, let's see, is that my, I don't know if you can actually see that, my mouse cursor for some reason. But to the right of run my code is like a little square with lines in it. Clicking that will actually open the console, and that's where we'll see the output. So when we actually are going to run the code after we've typed it in, then we'll see the output to the right in the console. So this is a really simple, kind of, it's a very simple, just, we're not going to, the input that we're going to have is going to be pretty much from within our code. So we're not creating a form or an application here or any sort of thing. We're just, writing some simple code and producing some output from it. And go ahead.
I was just going to ask, and you probably are just about to do this, but should we talk a little bit about, you're saying we're going to start entering code. Should we talk about Swift's syntax a little bit? The syntax is kind of, in programming terms, syntax means, basically how statements or how lines of code are written. And almost every language has some sort of structure to it. We talked about BASIC quite a lot because that's what I knew. So we talked about BASIC quite a lot, and there would be a line number and then a command, and then, like for example, the print command, and you'd have a quote, and then the content that you wanted to print, and then another quote, and then you could run it. So how does Swift's syntax compare to that? Are there ways that we have to form a command as we're entering it that allow it to understand what we're trying to get it to do?
No, not in the same way that it is BASIC. And I'm wondering if people are coming at this new, what I don't want to do is confuse them with stuff that doesn't, not that it doesn't apply, but if they don't know any better, it may, yeah, but I mean, you're right, but it, I don't want to confuse them with extra.
Well, okay. How about this then? Let's start with a classic. Let's start with Hello World.
Yeah, that sounds good.
When someone is learning to code for the first time, and I remember this from my early days of coding in high school, even when we were learning Pascal and Fortran, and then in college, COBOL and assembly. One of the very first things you do just to kind of get your feet wet is something called Hello World. And Hello World is simply that. It goes way back. It's one it's one of the earliest bits of code that you can find as you go research archives of coding and things like that. But it's a way to just kind of display the words Hello World on screen. So if I wanted to do that in Swift, how would I do that? What would be the command or the statement I'd have to write to do that?
Yep. And that's a good point. And what you were talking about with BASIC, it's pretty similar in that you have a print command, but it's a little different that you don't have the line numbers and that sort of thing. But if you want to do that, simply you would type print, which is a command in Swift, which essentially says anything, you have print and then parentheses. So anything in the parentheses that's in the print will be displayed as output in the console. So it's essentially telling the computer, display what I put in here. And the next thing you usually are displaying is a string. So that means we'll have quotes. And a string is a string of text inside of quotes. It doesn't need to necessarily be a string, but in this case it will be. So this is just going to be text, and we're going to type in there, hello world. So with this now, print hello world, simply that's all we need to do. We'll execute the code, and by clicking run code, and now it'll display hello world on there. So yeah, so the syntax in this particular case with Swift is just the print command and then whatever you have in parentheses, in this case, quote unquote, hello world.
So I can already see some differences between this and BASIC. There is
Yes.
a little bit of structure here in that it seems as if this command anyway requires the parentheses. So it would be print space, open parenthesis, your string surrounded by quotes. So quote, hello world, quote,
Yep.
and then a close parenthesis. So those parentheses are required or are they optional?
No, those are required because you're actually feeding that as input.
Okay.
That's you're actually telling your that's the argument going into print, and you're saying this is what I want to display.
Gotcha. Okay.
I
So
think
cool.
if
So
we
there's
take 'em out-
there's a little structure to it then.
oh yeah, there's total yes, completely, yeah. So we do that, it's giving us an error, and you can see the little red dot, which is nice about Swift Playgrounds again. And it's the other nice thing about these languages. I'm not sure if this is going to do anything. Let's see.
I noticed
Yeah.
that on the bottom of that coding window on the left, and again, if you're listening to this, what you see in Playgrounds is the code that you're entering is on the left, and if you open the console, the results of running that code are on the right.
Yep.
But I noticed as you start to type in commands at the bottom, and even before you type in commands, that at the bottom of that coding window, it gives you some options that you can just kind of click on and choose as you're
Yes.
entering code. And there
Yeah,
are some
it's
things
trying to
down there.
guess.
Yeah, it's trying to guess what you want to do. And there are some things down there that we're not ready to talk about. But, if you were to click on that if command down there, it would kind of say, oh, okay, you want to do an if
create an if
statement.
block.
And so here's the conditions, or I shouldn't say that because that's what it's asking for, but here is the code, the rough structure of the code that you need to enter in order to do a valid if statement.
Right. Here's a while,
Which is kinda neat.
A loop.
That's
Yeah,
kind of
it
neat
is.
that it does that. So it's Swift Playgrounds, and I'm guessing Xcode does this too, but Swift Playgrounds does its best
Yeah.
to guide you and really save you keystrokes. If you are a programmer, if you're someone who is familiar with the concepts of programming, not only does it guide you into how things might be different with Swift, but it also saves you a lot of time because you don't have to type in all this stuff. It fills it in for you.
Yeah, a lot of times in Xcode, well, no, I shouldn't say a lot of times, but like in Xcode and more advanced IDEs, they usually have a keystroke, and it's something called autocomplete, and it'll bring up different things depending upon what you're trying to do. And Swift has this down here where it shows you, which is really nice. And then, like we just did, you can click on it. In this case, like we clicked on the if, and it builds an if statement. So it builds a structure for you. So all you have to do is fill in, if this, then do, another if, whatever your if condition is, if 5 is greater than 6, then, then do some sort of action, which, in that particular case, it will never happen. So, but yeah, it's a really nice thing about Swift Playgrounds.
So while there is structure to the language, the development environment that we're working within, in this case Swift Playgrounds, but it could be Xcode, it could be Visual Studio Code, the development environment kind of helps you along, and you don't have to necessarily memorize all this stuff. So if
Right.
you want to do a print command, if you're just learning how to code in Swift and you want to do a print command, you want to print out hello world, you can start to type it in, and I think it will even kind of auto-complete it for you, even if you're not clicking some of those commands at the bottom, which I think you just mentioned. Or
Yeah,
as you
I
start to
was
type
just
it in, I think it suggests it on the bottom so that you can
yeah,
click on it to auto-complete a statement, which is kind of neat.
yeah. Print items any. Yeah, so it does fill it out to a certain degree. So now you can obviously put in your whatever you're trying to print.
Very cool. Very cool. Now,
It is.
what if we wanted to kind of plus this print statement? So we did hello world, obviously not the most complex piece of coding in the world, but it does get people's feet wet with how to use the Swift Playgrounds environment, or if you are following along in Xcode, it would help kind of get your feet wet with how to use that environment as well. But what if we
Right.
wanted to kind of plus this? So instead of saying hello world, we wanted to say hello Mike or hello Eric. In BASIC, there are things known as variables, and they can be numeric or they could be string or text-based variables. Is there a way to combine a variable, which is a way to hold a value? How can I describe that better? So if we had
Well,
a variable a,
it's in the name.
it's in the name.
It's in the name variable because it's something that's not always the same. When we said print quote unquote hello world, that's all it can do. It's hard coded in there literally. I mean, it's literally
Gotcha.
hello world. Whereas with a variable, that can change depending upon that can vary depending upon whatever condition or whatever part of the program that we're into. If we make, let's say, the world part of that be a variable, that could be anything, or
So,
or the whole sentence. Whatever we want to do.
so if we wanted to say hello Eric, but we
Right.
didn't want to hard code Eric in, we could set up a variable called what, name? Like,
Yeah. So we could say let name and say will equal Eric. Now, at some level, for this particular example, we are obviously hard coding this in here. However, if you were writing some sort of application or something where you could take input, this is our input here, then you would take it from the text field that was entered, and then you would bring that into you'd bring that into your program, into a variable, and then display that. So then we can say print. And we'll do this. Oops, I don't want to. Sorry. So where it's the same sort of print that we did, except for in this case we'll have hello in parentheses. Wow. Eric learns to type. But then outside of that, and this is another structure thing within Swift. So in displaying, in this case, a variable, we need a / and then the variable name. So this here is print hello name. So now this will actually, name is our variable, because up here I said let name equal Eric, and Eric is a string, and let name equal is a structure, or kind of a syntax that Swift uses to essentially declare variables. And kind of now I could have also, like Mike said before, used an integer or a number, whatever. In this case, I just used a string just to be simple, and it's a string automatically because of the quotes. But in Swift, when you say let, it's kind of there. I was going to say equivalent to it's a different language, but it's something in Swift that's essentially a structure that says let this variable exist, and then it's also another way of setting it to whatever thing you want to set that variable to.
in a way, as I look at this, And for those listening, we'll recap it again in just a moment. But it looks very much like the English language. In other words, we're using the word let. So,
Yeah.
you know, let Eric see the bird. In other words, Eric is go ahead and let Eric see the bird, right? Well, we're saying let this variable name equal this string, this value of Eric.
Oops.
I probably didn't explain that very well, but it looks very much like English. If you look at this,
Yeah.
you're saying, let this thing equal this other thing.
Oh, gosh, what did I do?
And then now that we've done that, I think it's inside the quotes, right?
Yeah, but I think you actually do leave that inside the quotes. Oops. No, there's something wrong. Sorry, but yeah, you were saying.
Yeah, the structure of what you typed in there looks very much like an English language sentence
Right.
versus basic, where very often when you're setting up variables, it's simply the variable name equals the variable value. And
Right.
you don't have that extra command let preceding the variable.
I forgot the parentheses. That's right. There we go.
I think you got it
Yep.
right.
Got the
So
parentheses to isolate the variable.
so what we did is we entered a line to set up and create the variable, and the variable in this case is called name. Could be called anything really. It could be called message, it could be called value,
Bob.
could be called it could be Bob. I
Yeah.
used to they in years past to have a little fun with the programs I was creating. I would theme my variables. So, one program, they would be themed to different soups. One, they'd be themed to different animals. And
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter.
No.
Your variable could be called Teddy the Wonder Lizard,
Yeah.
and the value of that variable is what matters. You're probably not going to want to call it Teddy the Wonder Lizard because that's a lot of typing
Yeah.
if you have to repeat that multiple times throughout your program, but it could be. It could be.
Right.
So let name equal Eric, and in this case, Eric is surrounded by quotes so that we tell it it's a string. And then
Yep.
in the print command, whereas before we just did print, open parenthesis, quote, hello world, quote, close parenthesis, now it's print, open parenthesis, quote, hello, a space, because we want a space between hello and the value of this variable name. And then, as you said, we need to do a forward slash.
Right.
That's the one typically above the return key on your keyboard.
Yep.
And then the variable is also in parentheses. So, as you explained earlier, those parentheses are kind of telling Swift that this is what we're passing this along, right? So we're
Right.
saying we want to pass along the value of this variable called name. So we put name within parentheses, we close the quotes, and then we close the parentheses to complete the print command. And when
Yeah.
you run that,
And
you get hello, Eric.
hello, Eric. And this is one of the things too. We were just talking about coming from different languages and the different structures. JavaScript, Java, number of other languages. I'm kind of used to, rather than having everything inside the quotes, it would be like hello plus and then name.
Yeah.
And so it's taken me a little bit to get used to this sort of format with Swift. It handles this sort of thing a little bit different.
In a
So
way, Yeah, what you just mentioned is what I'm used to from days
Yeah.
gone by, that
Yeah.
you would put what you want to literally say on screen within quotes, but then
Yep.
the variables would either be separated from that by a space or, as you said, a plus,
Yeah.
to indicate that this should be added to this other literal string that we put into the print command.
Right.
And that's
And
how I'm used to doing it from BASIC. But in a way, what Swift is having you do kind of makes a little bit more sense. You're basically telling it to embed the value of this variable within the string
right.
that print is outputting.
Yes. Right.
Now, one other
Right.
thing I've noticed that's a little different is I seem to remember that we used to have to define variables as a string variable specifically. So, and for example, it would
You,
be not name, but name dollar sign or dollar sign name.
right.
And that dollar sign is what indicated it was a string of
String.
text versus a numeric value of some sort. That doesn't
The
seem to be the case with Swift.
No, and I don't know if it's exactly like Java, where Java kind of has a primitive string where anything in quotes is essentially a string, but I think it's a little different than that. And I think with Swift, in this particular case, now I could put string in there, but by doing it this way, it's essentially inferring that it's a string. I believe, I'm trying to think if I've actually ever explicitly said that it's a string or not, but I think it's I think just the quotes itself,
Defines
or it
it.
might be, yeah. I think you could actually do something because the string, there is a string object in Swift now that I think about it. So if I said, let's name namer equal string. Oh gosh, that's the reason number one not to. I gotta shut off text expander, because this is killing me. Or typinator, excuse me. There we go. You can do something like that, and so now this namer is a string too. But by doing the quotes like this, I don't have to declare the string too. And
Yeah.
you can do that with the other data types as well. So if you have in computer languages, when you're working with different data, uh, you're working with different data, you have different data types. So the computer needs to know if you're working with a number and what the size of that number is, or if you're working with characters and it needs to know if the number is an integer, so in other words has no decimal to like one, let's say, or 100, or if it's a double or something called a long, and then there's a float, so you start using decimals, and it needs to know that because the processor essentially needs to know how to work with it. So you need to declare variables, and you need to be specific about what they are, either by pointing to a constant, like in this case Eric, in quotes, or by telling it this is a data type of integer or int or string or whatever.
Right. Now, and I have a question about numeric variables in just a moment, but going back to this example, if we didn't want to combine the static input of hello with the variable of Eric, if we just wanted to print a message that was defined elsewhere within our code, we could do something like let name equal hello Eric, and then in the print command, much more simply, just put parenthesis name, close
Name,
parenthesis,
right,
right?
right.
Because it
So
already
yeah, we could
knows that's a
actually,
string.
right. So we could just do this now, and it won't, without the hello, it doesn't. It'll print out Eric. Exactly.
Got it. Got it.
So you could actually just put the variable name or the variable within the print within the parentheses of the print, and it'll just print whatever's in there.
Now,
And it doesn't have to be a string; it could be a number too.
okay, and that's my next question. So we're talking about variables and how they might be used. We might have two variables, and we want
Right.
to when we print them, we want to add them together, or we want to do
Right.
something else with it. We want to take some action on them as we output them. So maybe at some point in our code, we set the variable number 1 to 5 and number 2 to 4 by simply saying let this variable number 1 equal 5 and this variable number 2 equal 4. Does
Right.
that define them as integers, or does it define them as a
That
number so that the Swift knows we can do mathematical operations on them?
it does. Yep. Let's see. Let 5. We'll do this. Let 5 equal 5, and oops, not 5. And then we'll say let 4 equal the number 4, just like it did with 5. And so in this case here, it knows that it's an integer. It could be, I could declare it specifically as an int, but it knows, what was I going to say? It knows that in this particular case, because of the number that I put there, that it's an int. If I did something like 4.0 or whatever, then now it turns it into a double. So, but yes, exactly. So now we could actually do math with that.
And can we do math within the print statement, or do we have to do the math ahead of time? Do we have to do yet a third variable that combines those other two?
No, we should do them. We should be able to do the math right within the print statement.
So we should be able to do print
Yeah,
5.
let's do that.
The variable's name is 5 and the variable's name is 4.
Right. Oops. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
And so if we perform addition on those two variables, the result should be 9 when we run the code.
Right. So we're going to do that.
There you
Yep,
go.
there we
That's
go.
awesome.
It is. Yeah. And we don't have to have a third variable there. I mean, you can do that, but you don't need to either.
So now variables are important. Knowing how to output the information with a print statement's super important. But
Yes.
variables are important too, because as you said earlier, we might have some sort of input, especially when we get to developing an app. We might have some sort of input that says, what is your first number? Now, let's keep this thing
Right.
simple. What's the first number you want to add? And we type in 5, and then it says, what is the second number you want to add? When you type in 4, and when you tell it to perform the calculation, whether it's clicking a button or clicking OK or whatever, then it outputs those two inputs added together. Did I explain that well?
Yeah. Yep. Nope. Exactly. You're just taking. So the whole reason for having variables right there, because you're letting the user input. Oh my gosh, why did this pop up? You're letting the user
Yeah, so when the user
type in
inputs the number, that number is set to a variable.
Right. Exactly.
Got it.
You're pulling that number or whatever the data is that's in the field and using it in your program, using it in your code.
Got it. Very cool. So all this stuff builds upon itself. I mean, even the most basic print statement, hello world, can be built into a fully functional application with the right amount of code added to it.
Right. Exactly.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, I think that might be a good place to stop with our first lesson. We've been talking about that for a little over a half hour now, and possibly longer even. But that might be a good place to stop, to just to kind of let people get their feet wet, just to let someone who might be interested in learning to code download Swift Playgrounds, download Xcode, maybe not Xcode, start with Swift Playgrounds, and start to play
Right.
with some of these introductory commands and maybe even open up some of those lessons that are available to you within Swift Playgrounds. And, if you're ready to jump to the next level, go ahead. But I think what we would like to do is start with this, rudimentary information, outputting content to the screen, setting variables so that we know what content we want to output, whether it's numeric variables, whether it's string variables, because you could even do things like, set one variable to a name, set another variable to a number, like let's say name and age, and
Right.
then when you're outputting that to the screen, say Eric is 653.
Right. Exactly. Days old.
There you go. And that those variables can be set with something that we'll talk about in a future episode, and that's using some sort of input command to gather information from the person using your program, using your app, gather information from that person, set it to a variable, and then output that information in some useful way back to the person using your app.
Right.
And some
Right.
of the ways that we're going to get there, I think in our next conversation about coding, we're going to maybe talk about control structures. What is a control structure, Eric? What is it, and why might we want to learn about those next time?
So we kind of hinted at it a little bit earlier. So with the if condition, and so that's part of it, but also looping is another part of it. But a big part of it is essentially you'll run into a situation where you'll need to use logic. So you'll need to decide, what am I going to do? Excuse me, what am I going to do at this point? So, and of course, I can't think of any great reason offhand, but in the case of, let's say, where we're using the name with the age, you could say, if this person is X number of years old, I'm going to then send them down to this path, say this message to them. So that would be a case in point of having an if statement in there and controlling how the code, essentially the variables going through and what you're outputting. And loops come into play when you could have multiple variables and you could have multiple results. So rather than trying to figure out, and again, this is the whole idea behind variables, but rather than outputting every possible, writing every possible condition, every possible output, you can essentially take that variable and run it through a loop where it will, iterate through, let's say, I don't want to get too far into this, but iterate through other variables to figure out what to do. So control structures are simply that. They control where your data is going through the program and exactly how your program works. So it's a logic thing, and this particular examples, the one we did here, are very simple. We're just we've just declared a couple of variables. In this particular case, we've added the two together and we display the output. But if we wanted to do something a little bit more complex, or to actually do something maybe useful, we would have to add if statements and stuff like that, or control different things depending upon the nature of the variable or what it is.
So to keep things simple so that I understand them, one thing we could do too would be to use some of the stuff that we learned today, like variables and the print command, even sticking with hello world, and say, let's set a variable to the number of times we would like to repeat this message on screen. So
Right.
we could do something like, let count equal 10. And
Yep.
then within I guess it would probably be an if statement or maybe a while statement. You know,
It'd be a loop.
while this condition is not equal to 10,
Right. Well,
print
it's less
hello
than 10.
world.
Print it out 10 times, print it out, whatever.
And then
And so that,
when
and
that
that's
condition's
a good,
satisfied, so
right,
while this number does not equal 10, print
right,
hello world, and it'll just sit there looping. It'll sit there looping over and over and over again until the condition is satisfied, and the condition being while it's not equal to 10.
right. And that's a case in point of why you would use a loop, something that I wasn't really able to articulate before. But without that, you would actually have to write that hello world 10 different times within your
Yeah.
program, 11 different times, and you would have to figure out, okay, what am I going to, let's say if you wanted to do it 200 times, you'd have to write it 200 times as opposed to writing it once and then looping through it 200 times and writing it out 200 times. So, or that same code. And so that's why you do a loop. In fact, actually, in the Revolution in the Valley book, there's a part in there where Hertzfeld and I think Burrell, I'm trying to think of his name, Burnell, were talking to some guy, and he apparently had written, I don't know, 800,000 lines of code. So he said some fantastically huge number, and some guy said, yeah, and then he discovered loops. And so that would be, and again, that's a kind of a programmer's inside joke, but it's funny because, like we were saying, you would have to repeat those lines. Anytime you have to repeat stuff like that, like you repeat print hello world X amount of times, that's where you actually want to loop, and say repeat this X amount of times, or while this is less than or equal to 10, do this, so yeah.
And from an app perspective, not only are you reducing the amount of code that you have to repeat over and over again, but you're adding so much more flexibility to your code as well.
Right.
By having a loop, even if you don't, let's say you don't define that variable to a fixed number of 10, but you ask the user, how many times would you like this message to appear on screen? They input a number, you set the variable to that number, and now you do the loop and let it repeat
Right.
over and over. So you don't have to guess what the user wants. You can tell them what you're going to provide them,
Yep.
but then let them control how many times they see it.
Let them decide, yeah. And another thing that we kind of talked about in the previous episode, and I think it's worth bringing up here now with the control structures, these things are so important. The if conditions, the looping sort of thing, they're such a fundamental part of languages and getting stuff done that they're even used in automation. In fact, you can find these very things inside of Apple's shortcuts, and again, you can create loops and you can create if statements within shortcuts to get things done. So you can say, let's say you're reading you're trying to pull off some articles from a web page, and you can say, repeat for each article, and then, so in other words, if there's 10 different articles on that page, it'll read through that, pull all 10 articles and then push them through whatever. So, and there's or let's say phone numbers, off contacts or a contact, repeat for each phone number, dial, whatever. And so it's this sort of information, whether it sounds confusing or not, whether I'm explaining it well or not, is very important, very fundamental when it comes to computer programming.
Yeah. Yep, I agree. And I think that's what we're going to talk about next time is control structures and how we can take this code that we're writing and repeat it as needed in different ways, of doing it.
Right.
So I tell you what, if you guys liked taking this first step into coding on the Mac, let us know, because from here on, we're just going to get a little bit more complex each and every time. And then, as I said earlier, I'm hoping that what we can do is maybe get to the point where we can assign ourselves a project. You can share what projects you're creating. We'll share a little project that we're creating, and maybe we'll all become coders when this is said and done.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Especially me. Maybe I'll become a coder.
Well,
We'll
I
probably
think
have
that's
somebody show us some full-fledged app that's like, thousands of lines of code. Here's what I did.
something like, say, Panorama 10.
Yeah, right. Right, exactly.
Hi, Jim.
Besides him. Besides Jim, yeah.
Well, that's going to do it for this episode of For Mac Guys Only. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Remember, we do love to get your letters, so if you have any comments about the show, a tip to share, a software or hardware problem with your Mac, or maybe there's some adventures in coding that you would like to share with us, be sure to leave your favorites in the comments of this week's show notes found at formaceyersonly.com, or drop me a line, Mike at formaceyersonly.com. And of course, Eric, you can be reached at...
Eric at formaceyersonly.com.
And be sure to subscribe to the show's YouTube channel at youtube.com/FMEOTV and click that little notification bell so that you can find out when we're going live. You can join the chat room and you can catch all the behind the scenes stuff that doesn't make the final cut of the show. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. Thanks to Eric for joining me this episode. Stay subscribed, and we'll talk to you next time.
I am so sorry. Can I run to the bathroom?